Where are all my friends? This is such a special episode to be with Kevin Lyman. Thank you so much for joining, dude.
Well, it's great to see you, Andrew. Even though we're across Zoom, it's always nice to see you. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, dude, this is seriously an honor. When I started this podcast, the whole idea was just talk to people in music that I think are doing really cool things. And it started with a very close circle of friends. And then it kind of went on to be just like the network of people that I thought were doing remarkably cool things or had accomplished things. And you've always been on the list. And I feel like it's kind of a no brainer. But it's like really like this is like a bucket list kind of episode for me because I think you are so important to music as a whole. So like I'm so serious, dude. Like it is an absolute honor to have you on. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Vivian for making it happen. So cool.
Yeah, Vivian was able to get us all scheduled, which is great. So thank you, Andrew, to make it work today.
Yeah, dude. So to intro it, what I want to go over in this podcast is like, obviously, you've done a ton of interviews and you have talked so much about the Warped Tour. And you just started a podcast that I did want to bring up because it's so damn cool. And it's like the best authentic deep dive on that tour. Like, it's you and Tony Arratia. Did I say that right?
Yeah,
Arratia?
a lot of
Yeah.
yeah.
There we
He'll
go.
appreciate that, Andrew. He likes that. Well,
Good. But yeah, like it's the dynamic of you two talking. He brings out a side of you because he wasn't as deep in it. So he's just talking to you like a friend. And the stories you tell and the way you've broken down the episodes of specifically focusing on like one little part and piece of the Warped Tour each episode is just such a treat. So I'm so happy you're doing that.
yeah, it was one of those things that I think with this pandemic, needed to you had to create and fill up that time. Busy people all of a sudden found themselves with time on their hands, and sometimes that time on my hand was driving my wife crazy. And she was like, "Hey, that garage you teach in a couple of days a week, why don't you go back there? You should do a podcast or write a book." And I'm too much of an outdoor person to actually sit down and write. So we started this process with the podcast, and Tony is someone who is affiliated with the music industry. He works in the technical side at Key Code Media, but we found ourselves in a bubble playing golf together. I was introduced to him from Tony from Papa Roach one day in the neighborhood, and we became friends. And you're out on the golf course, and during this pandemic, and you just tell some stories, and we have a good time. And he was very curious about a lot of the things that went on, but he wasn't there, which is kind of cool. So
Yeah.
everything to him that we talk about is kind of fresh and new, and
Yes.
had his own views on it. And we've had a really, really fun time doing it. So, as you know, doing the podcast is a lot of work. It's
Yeah.
not just getting a recorder and a couple mics, like I think some of the first podcasts now. There's a lot more work going into it. And I was able to bring in some of my students from USC who are kind of transitioning into jobs, and they needed some jobs. So I was able to hire them to do the social media marketing and do the Xavier's a USC student. So he's doing all the editing and putting the podcast together. So, creating jobs, during a pandemic. So that's what I try to do.
Dude, I love that. And that's so on brand of Kevin Lyman to like look to the young kids and find and give them opportunities to get involved in something cool. And it also shows that you take it seriously and you're not just going to like phone it in and hit record and then put it out. Like there's production value to the show. There's cuts to different interviews. There's storyboards and storylines. It's presented well. You have a YouTube channel. Like you didn't just come in and be like, oh yeah, podcast sounds cool. Like you guys thought it out. You built something really special. And being in it now, I really respect when people come in and do something right. So it's top notch. Like had to address it because it's amazing. And I think too, I was thinking about this before the interview. It's so interesting talking about the Warped Tour because it had gone on for so long. Every person that was involved, depending on who they were or who they were working for or what their relationship to the tour was or the years that they were a part of it, everyone is going to have a different story, a different perspective, different memories. So when you look at the documentaries or the things that try to cover it all in an hour or something, it's just impossible. Like, how do you do that? So the more Warped Tour content there is out there, I'm just happy because it's hard to explain in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and taking this, my work life has kind of expanded for me over 40 years now. Beyond Warped Tour, I was working all these other things. So now I'm able to bring elements of those other people because you led a warped life. Some of the people, Steve Van Doren's led a warped. So my work life kind of expands right now. And in upcoming episodes, I'm bringing in other people that maybe touched through the Warped Tour, but how I met them or did other things with them that I found was very interesting. So we have some plans to expand it out a little bit, maybe an idea of a cooking show in the backyard. And we have some music under the tree coming up. We're going to shoot a little pilot and see how that goes now that we can kind of gather a little bit more than we could even, 3 months ago. But we'll see how it goes. And then, I always believe as long as still remaining fun, keep doing it. And even though, Warped Tour for me was, a quarter century, and the majority of it was actually fun. And when I started realizing that that the fun was kind of being taken out of it in some way, and then it's just changing times, changing things. I just felt I had done everything with that project. So this transition to podcasts and professorships and some of the brand stuff I'm doing, I just feel it, I always tell this and I probably, I don't know if you've heard it. I always just say you run out of time. You don't run out of ideas, in life. And it's one of those things where, just turned 60. Andrew, who thinks, that you'd be working in the music industry over 40 years, 40 plus years. I started when I was 18, putting on some of my first events. And,
Yeah.
I go
Dude.
every day. I do wish I could jump back out and go, trucks roll up in front of the house. We set up a show. I just don't know, honestly, physically, number one, I could be doing the way I do it because we've toured together and
Mm-hmm.
I don't sit in an office. It's not
No,
my,
no.
so now it's just kind of concentrating my energy into other things and hopefully helping the next generation of people in this business, and especially through my teaching and education. After I
Yeah.
talked to you today, I've got one of my students who's now working at a company who they want to do something and maybe run it through my foundation, which is very cool. When you're teaching in school and they're taking that philanthropic thought now into their own workplaces. And the first call they want to have as her new company she's with is how maybe they can do a charitable event. Pretty cool. And then
Yeah.
you're kind of continuing on what you want to do in life. Probably be
Dude.
most effective.
Dude, that's totally it. And so as I was thinking about this interview, I figured we can't cover it all. We can't all of it. It's just too much, right? So I figured I would come at it from my approach and my genuine questions for you and my perception of what I've learned from you and just have a conversation about that. And to put a little bit of a backstory to that, I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but the way that you impacted my life was so crazy because I was 16 years old when I went to my first Warped Tour. I think everybody was kind of around that age. And I wasn't in music. I didn't really even know I knew that bands like that existed. I found that a little bit earlier, but for some reason it never registered to me that bands toured or they played live. I just didn't know. And I had a crush on this girl and she brings me to the Vans Warped Tour. And I go and I'm like, oh my God, like this is magic. Like it was the first time in my life that I understood that something like that could exist and that such a community existed around that. I felt like I was amongst people like myself for one of the first times ever. And there were so many of us. So I want to say that was Warped 2006. And then Warped 2008, my friends in Set It Off played like one day on the local show, and I saw them and I thought they were I was like, dude, we made it. We did it. Like, you played the Warped Tour. And fast forward, I end up working with them. That's the first band I ever go on tour with. We get our real Warped Tour offer. I think we were one of the, we played the local stages and didn't get water or catering and had to rough it and did like 3 days, whatever. But I believe it was 2013 that we did our first full Warped Tour. And that's where I really feel like I understood who you were. And I watched you set this example. And I watched that tour operate. And I watched you empower people and take chances on what would appear to be the biggest misfits. But you always believed in people so much and gave everyone a benefit of a doubt and worked so hard yourself and expected so much of everyone, but not in a bad way, in a way where it was like a real community on this tour. It was different from other tours. It was family and it was summer camp and it was so fun, but it was the hardest goddamn work I have ever done. I have never been more tired. We always used to joke that day 3 of like the first 3 days, by day 3, you're just dead. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just the most exhausting thing. And then you get past it. So experiencing all of that firsthand, you really changed my life. What I learned from that applied to my life more than so many other lessons. It was the college of my life. It was this thing in the back of my head of, if I can get through Warped Tour, I can get through anything, because nothing is going to be that hard of work. So that, like, you have left that impression on me forever, and I will always have that. And that's what I want to talk about, because maybe the Warped Tour doesn't exist anymore, but the person that you are and those lessons and that idea and what you're teaching and the legacy is so fucking cool and important. And I just want to hear where that comes from, because that's not like any other music festival I have ever seen or anything else in music. So that's my long-winded way to set that up and ask you about that.
It kind of goes back, Andrew, I think a lot to, where I grew up and how I grew up. And, it was a solid family, but we had to work. If you wanted something, you went and worked for it. There was no allowance. There was no extra money necessarily. We had food on the table. It wasn't that kind of situation. But, my dad was working hard, and my mom was taking care of 4 kids who were all adopted. We were all adopted. But if we wanted anything, we just got out there and had to work for it, and not take any shortcuts to it. So when I started working in the business in Los Angeles, in the clubs of LA, a lot of people said, "Hey, Kevin, unless you live in LA, you're not going to make it." I said, "Then I won't make it." And it was hard work, but it added the work to drive in and make that impression and work hard. But I don't know. I don't, and you don't know where this all comes from, but it's just my mindset that just give a crap. I mean, it's a simple thing. I said, I'd come home from tour and I'd be like, wow, I just spent 2 months with people who gave a crap. And watching, as you would watch me work, I would watch all of you work. And I would watch the person with that smallest 10 by 10 tent who had their thing set up, but they took their job so seriously and they knew they had to work hard, because if you didn't work hard, you would be kicked out of the tornado that Warped Tour was. You'd have your booth at the end of a far line under a tree because everyone was up early working. And those little things could make or break a band's career. Like if they don't in high traffic areas, if they're not. So everyone learned that word hustle, I like to use. And it's not hustling, it's hustle. And hustle to me is one of the best words. And it's just having the hustle to make whatever you do the best you can do it. So that, and I looked at it that it took every person out there from, Kerry Nicholson as one level of a production manager, but that person that had that tent for a band like Set It Off on their first tour, that had to drag it across the parking lot and get it set up every morning. Who the band who might have a chance of making it was there every day. The ones that would straggle out, and you would just watch it early on. Not be together when they show up at the tour, not have their stuff with it. It was always watching this happen. Then all of a sudden, it was just it was just about giving a crap. And then I'd come back into, I guess, the real world, we call it, civilian life, as as Fletcher would like to say it.
Quite the shock going from the tour to regular life afterwards.
And
Yes.
you would watch how people just don't give a crap. So I felt always, honestly, that I was so lucky to get to do what I got to do.
Yeah.
And I know that if I was out there working hard, you guys were watching me, I was watching you, we would push each other to try to make the day the best we possibly could for ultimately the kids that came to the show. And
That's so well said. But you know what's interesting about that is it was one of those rare environments. Like it was an ecosystem, right? Like you made a setting, an environment, this summer long place where hard work was noticed and rewarded. Because there's a lot of times in life where you can give a crap and you can hustle, but it's not as like direct. Whereas you knew, at least from our perspective, it's like, I'm going to go out for the next 2.5, 3 months, whatever, and work harder than I've ever worked, but it's going to mean something. It's going to pay off. And together we're going to work hard. And I think that bubble of Warped Tour where you knew that hard work mattered and worked and people did it together was magic.
And it was a great equalizer, Andrew. If you got out there and worked hard, you were recognized, whether you were male, female, African American, white, Hispanic. There was really no, there was no barriers out there. No one was looked at differently. You were just looked at if you knew how to work hard.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
if you didn't know how to work hard, it became very apparent very quickly. And it became apparent to a whole scene of people. It wasn't just maybe a band they were working for. It was now they were on display with their whole community that they hope to work for in the long run. I've never been a good person at broing down or schmoozing, or as this industry, sometimes people get ahead because of that. And that's a whole skill within itself, but in the long run, but the people in the long run that I like and they got ahead were the ones that cracked it out on that field at 7 a.m. and worked all day and were still there at the end of the night and did exactly up to the moment, and then could go to a barbecue and have a great time and then go to bed and do it all over again. Now, if you have that on your resume that you worked a few summers on the Warped Tour or a summer on the Warped Tour, you get hired by other people that know you worked hard, you had a good attitude, and you didn't complain much.
Yes, dude. Yes.
Much. I always say much because we all complained, including myself at the time. And usually it was hot. And you didn't really need the person next to you telling you it was hot all day, or everybody. It was like, stop saying it's hot. Everyone knows it's hot.
It was like perfectly miserable. Like we were all in it together. Like there were so many moments that just sucked, or like the days that would get rained out. Like you'd have those specific days where it would be like the city where you just know it's going to rain all day and there's nothing you can do about it. And you just get your tarps and try your best, or the days where you know it's going to be over 100 and you're like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm just going to do what I do. But it was beautiful. It was the most rewarding shower you could take at the end of the night. It was the most rewarding kick back at the back of a bus trailer and sit in a camping chair and feel like you had just gone to battle and won with your brothers and sisters. And it was like, that just made it so good.
And I think so many people that worked on Warped had gone to Warped, like you said, as a fan first.
Yeah.
The emotional feeling you had from that show. And that's why you worked so hard. You didn't know why you were working so hard. And sometimes you would question why you were working so hard. But you knew that you wanted to give those kids the same show you had.
Yes.
And that show was not for everyone. I always said Warped wasn't for everyone. There was a lot of people who came to Warped Tour one time because they thought they needed to go or they heard they should go. And it was probably a very miserable day for them. There's a funny thing on TikTok right now with a woman just talking about her miserable time at Warped Tour. I want her so much in my podcast. I'm trying to track it down, and she has a great YouTube. It's been watched like tens of thousands of times of her just reliving her miserable day and commiserating with other people, like the comments, who had a miserable day. And you know what? The tour wasn't for them. It was for people themselves and so many other people, the tens of thousands or millions of people. We did about 12 million people on that tour. That if 10% of them to me walked out of there and affected their lives in a positive way, great. And then 80% came and just had a fun day. And then 10 people were as miserable as that woman on TikTok this week. Then hey, mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah. But like that, It was exactly that. And I respect it so much. And that's what I'm so curious of is like, you built something kind of out of nothing. Like the ones who understood it, like when you got out there on that tour as a fan or as crew or as a band, when it clicked, you're like, oh, I'm at home. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. I have my people. We're miserable together, having the most fun, best memories of our lives. And it clicks. But that, I mean, like, dude, I told you, like, my first Warped Tour was 2006. So you had a lot of years of proving this concept and making something out of nothing. And I know your early days was like club promoter vibes in LA, right?
Yeah,
But
production. Yeah,
I
promoter
would
rep.
have to imagine, because I think that there's a lesson in your story that people could learn of like, no, the Warp Tour won't happen again the way that it did or whatever, but you made something basically out of nothing. Like you had this idea and you just threw together this thing. And I think that as music continues to evolve, there will be those opportunities again. And somebody will see that hole and be like, oh, this is my favorite thing ever with my favorite people, and we need a this. So, like, what was that? What were those early days? Like, were you scared to start that, or were you just like, I have to do it? Like, what did that look like?
I think I had no other option but to start something, to be honest. I
Interesting.
don't think I'm employable. I have a hard time being employed. I think I'm hanging on at USC. I'm a good teacher. I'm not a good employee. I'm always scrambling, trying to update. Last year, you have things you have to do when you work within a system. It's a whole process for me. The teaching and education side comes pretty easily. The
Yeah.
communication with the generation that I'm teaching, I at this point have a good rapport with them. I think I'm leaving them with things that will go on in their lives. But I don't know if I had any other option, Andrew. I could have been a production manager, probably around in the clubs forever. I was good at that. I would have been a touring production manager. I was already doing some artist tours, but I didn't want to spend my whole life on the road. I loved traveling. I loved controlling the environment a little bit. Like, so that's why Warped went out around the same time every year. I can control my environment. I even control what days off we had so I can go fishing in the right spots, just things like that. That was a little bit of my life, but I just don't know if I had any other options but to try things. And when you have no other options, failure, they say sometimes isn't an option. It could have happened, but I just was going to like figure it out and willing to try anything to make it successful.
Yeah.
And without for the audience that got it. It wasn't. I could have pivoted, to be honest. I probably could have kept work going for quite a few more years. One, either becoming that retro tour, which would have been fun but it would have gone for 3 or 4 years with all my old friends. That would have been fun. But now I could do little things if I choose with them. Or I could have kept adapting with the sounds and music.
Yeah.
And it was going into that whole mumble rap phase. And I just didn't think the artists were really someone that had the teams around them or people around them that I wanted to spend a whole summer with. No offense, some people
Yeah.
love that music. It just wasn't
Well,
where
no,
I
that
was at.
says it well.
And it was time. I'd done everything I can. And when people say, "Oh, we need to do a Warped Tour," no, you need to create something better than Warped Tour, or create
Yeah.
something with your own vision.
Can I ask you a question with that?
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely don't want to steal the podcast and make it about me, but I kind of had a moment a couple years ago in my career where I had left a label and I kind of had that same thing where I was like, I don't know if I'm employable. Like, I don't know, like if I fit into this. And I was really excited about like emo trap, emo rap, whatever you want to call it. Like there were certain artists where I was freaking out. So I kind of just made my own thing. I called it version 3 and I signed a couple of my friends and I was just like helping them with whatever they needed. I was like, do you want playlists? Do you want to, what do you need? And I was just trying my best. And a lot of them looked up to like the Warp Tour legacy type artists and had never gotten a chance to tour. And from everything I had learned in touring and doing pretty much everything on the road, I was like, fuck it. Like, let's just try. Like, let's do a little tour. And we all got in one van. And like, I mean, guarantees were door deals. Like, we were just like, everyone was just on board to give it a try. And people showed up. And I cried the first night. Like, I saw people show up and I saw the kids that got the first chance to see these artists play live and everything. And it was so emotional to me because it felt like it wasn't about me. It felt like it was this community. Was it like that with the Warp Tour? Like, did it become something that was bigger than you?
It was for a long, for, yes, it did. It did. And then, it, it, I never thought it would become something where people said, "Oh, we can't tour during the summer if we're not on Warp Tour. We can't be around." Warp Tour was there to support the community. Um, you touch on quite a few things, and it's exciting to see. I'm watching it from the sidelines right now, watching to see that community that I think kind of went away a bit for a while there. There really was no community. Is
Yes.
now the essence of that community is being brought back by people like Black Bear, but driven by like Machine Gun Kelly, Black
Yes.
Bear, watching Mod Sun have his moment.
Yep.
I look at it right now and go, wow, there's a ton of great bands that could use something like a Warp Tour. If a couple big artists would bring them all along, you could probably put something really, really cool together because, there's Altered States, cool band. There's just all these really cool bands. I just got a thing on Warning, this female rock band from Mexico City that's got something coming out. But I think
Yeah.
it's that sense of community where I look at it now. You got Halsey singing with Mod Sun. Like I love Mod Sun, but I didn't know if he was going to. He's bigger. Mod Sun's having this moment right now, but
Yeah.
it's
He was
because
out there playing drums with Scary Kids with you out in the
they're
summer parking
all
lots.
they're all supporting each other.
Yeah.
And maybe that elder statesman is Travis Barker going in and saying, "Hey, let's drum, let's play together, let's do this together."
Yeah.
And then people like MGK, who's really matured into kind of a leader out there. And then you see all of a sudden, I guess Avril Lavigne's going to come back in and grab her pop punk roots, which I always try to get Avril to do Warped Tour. I always thought that would have been great.
I'm
But
surprised she didn't do one.
there was a moment going on. I think that was more of a management thing. I think if the message had actually gotten to her, I
Yeah.
think she would have come out and done a few dates, like and probably had a great time. Really think she
Yeah.
would have gone, wow, this is
Oh,
this is
yeah.
really fun. And then watching Halsey and some of these people who did come out of those Warped Tour parking lots. I know a lot of those people who came to those. So there's this moment in time that there definitely feels like, and maybe that it took a pandemic to bring that community back together.
Yeah.
And you hate to say nothing positive comes, but you have to look at positives in everything. If we only look at
Yes.
the negatives of what happened in society right now, we'll go back and repeat some of those same things we were doing before, but maybe we can learn from it. And maybe they can learn that, being a community will lead to a long career. Take a step back to move forward once in a while. Our industry was always just like charge, 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 charge. And it really got to that point the last few years. It's like, if I could make $10 more doing something else, I got to do that and try. And understandably, the economy changed as you don't make money on CDs and streaming revenues. The whole
Yeah.
business has changed. But gosh, what a time that you could really do something really, really cool.
I felt like to a degree at the end of Warp Tour too, like you were like the giving tree. Like that kid's story is like, you were just a dude. You were just trying to help your friends. You were just trying to give kids a chance. And everyone would come to the giving tree and they'd take and take and take. And they'd get their little chance and they'd get main stage. And then the next year, they never wanted to be associated with the name Vans Warp Tour ever again because they were too cool and they were going in a pop direction. And I was like, that's cool. Maybe don't remember your roots. That's
Yeah,
fine
no,
too.
Andrew. It got exhausting, to be honest, Andrew. There was multiple things going on, um, there was that where bands, when we worked with bands like Paramore or Day to Remember, they'd start on the smallest stages and then work their way up, play a big stage for you before they went on and did big pop things. And that was
Yeah.
how but they also supported the younger bands below them.
Yep.
So whenever you invested in a band and moved them from a small stage to a big stage, it was a lot. You had to really think through it, and you hopefully had some sort of kind of plan with the management and the bands, and kind of like, okay, you'll be on that. You'll go from a small stage up to a big stage, and we'll get you up there, and then maybe you'll come back and do one big year with us and bring some the small bands behind you. And when that stopped, that was a little hard. Just multiple little things, just little tick, 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 tick things that it
Yeah.
just wore down. And I was like, it wasn't really fun. So really, that's what I did in 2018 when I really was like, all right, I'm going to invite the bands I know. I'm going to make sure they have a road manager that I know. I'm not going to have to deal with any problems because I know that we're not bringing children on tour. And we'll go
Yeah.
out and have a great run across the country. Thank everyone. And then do these weekend shows.
Yeah.
And it was draining. It's draining. I gave up a lot of my life. It was been a fantastic life, a life I would say well lived.
Yeah.
But you want to go off and do other things now. I'm doing so many really cool things, working in the mental health space, working, doing a recovery event up in Vegas in the fall, helping my students, right after I get on with you, getting on a phone
Yeah.
call with them who are now working at a company that wants to put on a charity event, maybe do it through United My Foundation. So
Yeah.
uh, there, hopefully, you know, some people came out of it better, and hearing that you
Dude,
came out a better person than going, hey, makes it worthwhile, right?
I just really respect everything you did, and I think that I respect you for saying, okay, well, cool. I'm not having fun anymore, and this was supposed to be something really special, and you pivoted, and I think that that's awesome. One point that I did want to go back to, talking about just a pinnacle of fun, or I don't know. I just want to get your take on this. Is my first Warped Tour was
Yeah.
2006. However, history tells a moment of Warped Tour 2005. And I had Tim McTagg from Under Oath on my podcast. And I don't know if this was actually 2005, but a moment that he describes of like, wow, this is happening and the band is about to be big, big, was a moment at the Atlanta Warped Tour when they were on the Smart Punk stage. And it happened to be a pavilion or a gazebo that day. And they had to call it because it was too crazy and the stage was breaking. And he very specifically remembers that and kind of jokes that like you had to be like fake mad. Like you're like, oh, don't elicit this. But like deep down, you're kind of proud and you're like, that's sick. That's very punk rock. But did you, as the founder, have a moment, or what was your experience, like an era around 2005? Like, did you have a specific day or a specific year where you're looking at one of these crowds and you're just like looking at every artist on it, like the TRL days, Fallout Boy is on it, popping, like just this crazy era? Like, did you have a moment where you're like, wow, this is real?
For me, it really started to change as early as 1996, when Pennywise and No Effects came out.
Oh,
And we
wow.
played some pretty big shows. Just watching the band start to pop. But that 2005, when Fallout Boy and My Chemical Romance and that whole world and TRL, that's when you almost become too successful for your own good.
It was like that, huh?
Yeah, we almost collapsed under our own success because we were not set up for the types of crowds that were coming out because
Yeah.
we had to move so quick. We had to get that show up and down. It was good for crowds from 15 to 20,000, but when we were getting up to 20 to 30,000 people a day, there was some big crowds. Yeah.
That's so crazy. So for you, the moment of like, wow, it's working and there's a community and there's people actually happened far before these legendary moments of like the 2005 era.
Oh yeah. See, I'd worked with a lot of the punk bands, in the clubs and everything. So some of the bigger ones started saying, we want to be a part of Warped Tour. This is where we want to be. This is our home. That to me was the moment I go, okay, now I found my home. Now I'm not a big production manager in arenas and I'm in dirty parking lots because I started in the dirty clubs.
Yeah.
And, when we did shows in the theaters we broke into basically, or the old rundown theaters, we didn't get to play the nice venues. And 97. And it was great, and then all the other different things I got to do with other festivals and working on brands and being a part of so many nonprofits and we talk about a life well lived, and that's where I'm kind of at right now. Every life well lived is going to have some speed bumps in it to navigate, but it's how you navigate them and how you move through them.
That's so fucking cool, dude.
and
That's
and that and that's really what I would like to leave, because I know you have a generation that we're so easy to cancel people, or this cancel culture sometimes. Everyone goes through a roadblock, and if people learn from those roadblocks. Now, some people are horrible, don't get me wrong, there are some people that are horrible people.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No music scene has more than any other.
Yeah.
No bank has more than any other that works there. No grocery store. There are bad people that should not be part of certain things. But then
Yes.
a lot of people will go through some speed bumps in life. And if they can learn and be educated and do something to move forward from them, we
Yeah.
have we have to learn to have some sort of go back to some sort of reasoning in society. We've lost, I hate to say it, someone said a term, the American public has lost their collective minds. And I think it started with an effing collective minds. And in many ways, I believe that if 94% of us were put in a room, we could find common ground. We could figure a lot out. And
Yeah.
until we're willing to get in that room with people that we don't agree with, nothing. It's gonna keep getting torn apart more and more. And I saw little parts of that of the art music scene at the end of there when the bands were tearing each other apart
Yeah.
without even giving the credit of meeting those people in person. They would tear each other apart online. They would
Yeah.
declare they don't want to work with this band or tour with this band. But you
That's
know
right.
what? I'll never forget the Black Eyed Peas, like you mentioned them earlier, meeting Pennywise in a parking lot and all hanging out. They didn't know who each other were, but eventually they realized they were pretty nice people and they shared the love of music, maybe a different type of music. And the music industry is just a microcosm of society as a whole. And when I saw that being pulled apart so easily, that people weren't pulling together, and that's what makes me proud of watching what's going on with some of these bands now. That
Yes.
I'll play on your record, I'll sing on your records. Why hip hop was so strong because so often the bigger artists would get on and guest on a younger artist's album. Now maybe I'm
Yeah.
seeing this with this whole movement of emo coming back, that there's almost like this collective of artists that realize they're better together than apart, and they will support each other and move the scene forward, whatever scene they're in.
Dude, that message never changes. That ethos never changes. And I think you're right. Like that started to feel like it was getting lost and that was so discouraging. But to see it doesn't matter. You don't have to be the guy at the festival. It's just that that is so important when it's done right and music continues to go. And that's so much of what I want to say in this podcast is just supporting each other and finding those ways and building a community. So the way you just shared that, it's everything to me. And that's so damn cool. And honestly, my last question for you is kind of something you just touched on. But if somebody's listening to this and they relate to you and they admire what you had done with the Warped Tour and everything you had done, even past the Warped Tour, just the person you are, they have a similar mindset themselves. They've come from having to work for things and they want to make a difference and they want to add to it and they want to advance music. What's your advice to this next generation? What can they do?
Well, I think it's one, we have to readopt the idea of patience, that it doesn't all come quickly. Nothing came quickly in my life. That if you want something to work, you have to put everything on the line to make it work. And I think there's a book that everyone could read right now. I have all my students read this book. It takes, even if you hate books, you should read this book. It's about 10 minutes to really absorb what it's about, and about an hour and a half to 2 hours probably to read, and maybe little bit of investment in time. It's called Ikigai.
Okay.
It's called Ikigai. It's a philosophy from Japan about life and how you want to find out what you're good at. You want to find out what the world needs. You find out what you want out of life, your happiness, and you find out what can make you money. And when you can find that and blend them all together, you find your Ikigai. Now, a lot of times our parents would want the money part on top, but I always say, you know what, money will come. And people don't realize it. I was never driven by money and doing the Warped Tour. It wasn't. It was about a culture and a lifestyle that I really loved, and I don't know. People ask me now, "Are you still in the music business?" I actually think for a second, and I go, I don't know. Maybe I'm in the education business now. And, I ask all my students also to write 3 words that describe their life. And mine, it was music, education, and philanthropy. And I think and I tell them to go back to those words. And when you're young, you can change those words, but zero in on what 3 words will define your life. And I think those 3 things will.
That was art. the way that you just said that. Like, dude, thank you. Wow. Like that. I got nothing, man. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for empowering and inspiring and giving an entire generation a chance to have a career in this industry, because you certainly fucking impacted my life for the better. And that's really cool.
Thank you, Andrew. And, I'm glad you're checking out the podcast. It's fun. It's been fun, and your podcast is great. And, it's a fun way to do, you get to catch up with people. Like haven't gotten to see each other at a show or anywhere in a long time. So it's been really fun to be on this.
Dude, absolutely. It's really, really cool to check in. And I agree. I think that there's something about meaningful conversations, and now having podcasting as a way to share them and to have more of them is something that I absolutely love. So to see you doing the same is so cool. And anybody listening to this, if for any reason you haven't seen My Warped Life, just go dive in, because it paints such a beautiful picture of everything that you built in such a fun storytelling way. Is there anywhere else people can find you? Is it just go check out the podcast? Is that the best way?
I mean, I've never really been good. I have you can follow me on Instagram at Kevin Lyman. It's always fun. Now photos of my garden and barbecuing and, camping seem to be more than music at this point, but hopefully have some photos from a festival. I'm still on Twitter, not as much. I'm not, I'm kind of winding that down a little bit, but, Kevin Lyman, Instagram, Kevin Lyman, Twitter, I'm still around,
Yeah.
Facebook, you go on, you need to go on Facebook to because when you run a podcast, you have to do marketing, as and go out and do all these things, and it was pretty sad for seeing just so many people struggling in the last year, but it's nice to see people talking about getting hired back and jobs coming back and tours being talked about. And it's nice to see that. And I'm excited to see my friends and extended family getting back to do what they love and bring something to people that people love. So we're getting there. We're getting there.
Absolutely. So there you have it. Kevin Lyman's story, Kevin Lyman's podcast episode. I really hope you liked that one as much as I did. This was a really, really special one for me, and I'm so inspired by him, and he really made an impact on my life. So I hope this episode made a positive impact on you as well, and I hope you took something away from it, because he's a really rad dude. Again, if you did, the biggest favor that you can do for myself and the podcast is just subscribing to it, telling your friends about it, sharing it. All of that is massively helpful. And again, to echo how cool his podcast is, My Warped Life, go search it anywhere, give it a listen. He tells the story of that tour so well there, and shares really, really fun stories. So I think you'll enjoy that as well. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week.